it's really fun. I got to do these 10 hitters I love. I'm in the process of doing my top 300 hitters for 2025. That's going to release here in a few weeks. But in the meantime, I kind of just got to cherry pick players that I just wanted to talk to you guys about. Normally, what I do is I do a big rolling chart presentation, but don't you worry, you've not been saved from the rolling charts. That this is really just a proxy for being able to talk about rolling charts. But I've got these 10 players I love. We're going to start with methodology and then go through this list of players. Obviously, these aren't just necessarily players who I think are going to be the best, right? There's something special I want to talk about with each of these players, even if we already kind of know who these players are. And that sort of just leads me straight into my methodology and why I want to, sort of really talk about some of these things. So I want to talk about how to fall in love, right? None of this is special. None of these aren't things you probably couldn't have thought through on your own, but I still wanted to put them together here in a slide. When we talk about skills, I think the very first thing to talk about with skills is, we want to, we get excited when we see players with new skills, right? When I say 10 players I love, it's really 10 players I get excited about. The guys that in the draft room, when they're still in your queue, when it's your pick, that's one of the great feelings of the draft, right? That's one of the true joys. This guy came to me. This is what I wanted. And one of the reasons we get excited about these players is, of course, skills. New skills is great. We mostly see this with young players, but sometimes old dogs learn new tricks. There's also new ceilings and floors for existing skills, right? There's going to be a couple examples where a player has always been good at something or has always sort of shown us that they have this potential, but now we're seeing trends in a direction where, new higher ceiling, new higher floor, these kinds of things that can get us really excited as well. And, one of the things that can be really hard, and one of the reasons I love rolling charts, is that when we are talking about baseball players, we talk about these stat lines, and sometimes it's a month, sometimes it's a half, sometimes it's a full season, but it's a single number. And in reality, if you play fantasy baseball, you don't feel that number, right? There's a decent chance that a 300 hitter never hits 300 over the course of a single week or a month, right? Their batting averages adjust all the time. That's an easy, low-hanging fruit example. But the reality is these players change throughout the year. And one of the biggest steps that players take in going from someone who's interesting to someone who's awesome is when they show us that they can make adjustments. Because pitchers don't pitch to a guy the same way all season long. Players don't, stay the same guy all season long. They don't have the same approach in the box all season long. Things change. It changes on what they're seeing, on what pitchers are giving them, on how, sometimes it's just based on their health. It's all kinds of things. They're making these adjustments all the time. And when we see them make adjustments repeatedly that allow them to get back to levels of success, right? Everybody slumps, right? But how do they break that slump? How do they get out of it? When we see that, that's something really exciting. I've got this underlined here, but not all skills are fantasy stats. You can be very good at something and it never shows up in box scores, right? I mean, exit velocity is a classic example of you can hit the ball really, 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 really hard. But if you always do it on the ground, it's never going to turn into home runs, right? You can't bounce a home run. The rules say you can't. So it's really important just to remember that not all skills are fantasy stats. And we can get really excited about skills, but we also have to remember that doesn't necessarily mean they'll turn into stats, but we can always pray that they do. Role, obviously important. It's one of the main things. So, we're still a little early in the off season, and I know Kyle Bland's been working a lot on our projections and making updates. And people ask sometimes, why do projections change at this point in the off season? And it's all about role, right? Number one, are you in a position to succeed, right? Is your team putting you in the right spot? A great example of this would be for years, Kyle Tucker had to bat sixth for no reason. Right. And he still excelled, but it was not the position for him. He should have been hitting higher in that order. It drove me absolutely bonkers. But, seeing a player get put into a position to succeed really can get exciting. I don't have Kyle Tucker on this list only because I would have used the whole hour to talk about Kyle Tucker. I love Kyle Tucker and I didn't have that kind of time. We also, do they have an established role? We're looking for, players can go from having a really safe role to one that's really not, or, what is the path to getting that established role? So those are things that can get us going. Opportunities to expand their role, of course, right? Is this a player who should see at-bats against lefties, right? Kerry Carpenter, great example. Maybe not, right? He does not hit lefties well. Do we actually want him to expand that role? So it's always something to think about. And then, of course, just being at the right place in the right time. That's sort of like the Isak Paredes thing. Ends up in Houston. There could not be a better place for him to go. We also look at stat ceilings and floors, right? We want to know a couple key things, right? We want to know that this ceiling that we're praying for is plausible. We want some sort of logical path. Like, this is how that happens. You can't just say Brendan Donovan's going to hit 30 home runs. He's not, right? There's no, there's no logical path to that happening. He just has to be a different person, and then that can happen, right? So we want a ceiling that is plausible. We want floors that are sturdy and clean, right? We want to know what that floor looks like, right? I mean, there's always the floor of like, oh, he got hurt in the offseason and didn't play. Okay, fine. But when he's on the field, what's that floor? Or, do we have a sturdy floor? Do we know what to expect? If the worst were to happen, do we know what that looks like? Because that changes how we approach our draft. It changes how we approach our player evaluations. Knowing where the floor is a really important thing, and can actually be something that sort of, high floors get us excited. And then, of course, multiple routes upward, right? If they have to do one specific thing, that's great. But, are there other things they can do? When Ellie De La Cruz isn't hitting, he runs, right? He's got multiple paths to being a high producing fantasy player. So we like to see these multiple routes upward. And then finally, price and fit. One of the most important things to me is the min pick, right? I mean, sometimes min picks get a little wonky, especially late in the draft, but start with that min pick because that's the price you may have to pay, right? ADP is an average price over time, but in your draft, the min pick is a great way to know if I want this player, this is where that has to happen, right? Because someone else has been at least this interested. So when I think about players I love, it's a lot of players who I'm like, I'll be the min pick. I'll be that guy, right? Like, I'm willing to do that. That's really, to me, what, sort of falling in love means with the players, that I'm willing to be that guy. Looking at ADP trends is also very helpful. I have some really cool stuff to show you that Kyle's been working on that's live for our PL Pro members. And finally, like, how is this player compatible with your different team builds, right? Paul Spore's term of rabbits is one of my favorites. These all speed guys, they're only compatible with very specific builds. They basically all get removed from your list right away. So none of these players are that type. They're all players that I think are compatible with just about every team build out there. So that's another reason that I'm really excited about them. And without further ado, let's move to the players. And I'm kind of going to start closer to the top of the draft and then move down as we go. But the number one player I wanted to talk about, and maybe the guy I have the most to say about, is Yordan Alvarez, right? So, I mean, all of you know who Yordan Alvarez is. There's not a lot of questions about, what it is he can do, perhaps. But the reason I love Yordan Alvarez is because it's just amazing how good he's been. And I haven't noticed. I do a hitter list every week. And somehow I didn't notice just how great Yordan Alvarez is when he's in the box. There are, hundreds of players with at least 100 PA over their career and that are still active. There are two of them with a better career WRC plus than Yordan Alvarez's 166. They are Aaron Judge and Mike Trout. Those are the only two active players with a better career WRC plus than Yordan Alvarez who have at least 100 plate appearances. That, like, we don't talk about that. Like, we talk about Aaron Judge and we talked about Mike Trout all the time. Yordan Alvarez is that level of player when it comes to just being in the box hitting the baseball, right? His worst in-season totals, this is, his lowest season apart from 2020 is when he played 87 games. His lowest seasons anywhere, right? He's never hit fewer than 27 home runs. He's always gotten at least 78 RBI. And that batting line of 277, 346, 531, that's actually not from his 87 game season, but that's the worst batting line he's ever had, right? When we talk about floors, that's a floor, right? If this dude plays half a season, he's going to hit 27 home runs. Like, I love that. And of course, when we talk about team context, look, the Astros offense is going to be fine, right? They've brought in some guys to replace, it's not like Bregman set the world on fire last year. Kyle Tucker's a hard player to lose, but I think they've made some moves. This offense is still going to be really good. Yordan Alvarez is still a guy who, per StatCast, is in the 90th percentile of like everything. And he actually finished as the 17th best player last year, hitter number 11, even though he missed some time. Looking at these rolling charts, one of the great things, you look at this 50-game rolling chart, his worst ever WRC plus over a 50-game period is 116. This dude was 16% better than the average player at like the lowest moment of his career, right? And it's happened a few times that he's bottomed out at 116. That, between him and Juan Soto, that's one of the highest performing floors in baseball. It doesn't get better than that. And of course, the ceiling is best hitter that's playing at the moment. Something interesting, though, about Yordan Alvarez you may not have realized. I love these process plus charts that Kyle made for us. The white line shows you where, like, sort of the total process plus is. As for most players, power is sort of one of the biggest factors on your process plus, but you would have probably thought that Yordan Alvarez was a guy that was a big decision maker. But when you see that purple below the line, what you're actually seeing is that Yordan Alvarez, per our model, doesn't necessarily make great decisions. That's because he's one of the few power hitters with a plus contact ability, right? That orange in the middle there, that shows he's consistently at least 10% better than average on his contact ability. So when he chooses to swing, he makes contact much more often than normal players. The guy doesn't need to have great decision-making because he can hit things other people can't. I usually use the example of Luis Arias. His decision-making per our thing is terrible, even though his ratios are great. And it's because he doesn't need to make the same decisions as everyone else. Yordan Alvarez is better at hitting than most people. He doesn't need our model's advice on when to swing. And I cannot, it's so simple, but like this dude's just a dog. Yordan Alvarez, again, the injury risk is always real. He played plenty of games last year. And even if he misses half the season, I talked about what happens when, what's the floor look like? This dude misses half the year. It's still 27 home runs and 78 RBIs with a 277 average. Okay. I'll find a way to make back some of that, right? I can get, I can work with that if I have to replace him for half the season. But, there's a bit of injury risk there. Obviously, I think the Astros are doing a pretty good job at trying to manage that. But again, when this guy's on the field, he's just so darn good. And the first look at the cool new thing I want to show you is something Kyle made for our users. But this is actually rolling NFBC draft data over 14 days. So it's not necessarily a ton of drafts, but it's a really cool look at where guys are being taken. And how that's moving over time. For most players, it's pretty stable. For Yordan, pretty stable, right? His ADP overall is about 16 and a half. It moves around, but it's always between 16 and 18, which is roughly where he finished last year. And like that to me, his floor is so darn high that this is a great spot. I'm happy to pick, I'm happy to take him 12th, which is his average min pick. He's been taken inside the top 10, and I get it, right? Because if this dude plays 150 games, it's 40 home runs, it's amazing ratios. This guy does it all except run, and I don't necessarily care about that. I have other ways to get stolen bases. So, I mean, as you can just tell from my passion here, I love Yordan Alvarez. He is always a good pick. The fact you can get him in the second round is just, as John's saying, it's amazing. It's incredible. It's just value you could not ask for a player who, it's not like we're asking him to grow. We're not asking Yordan Alvarez to be different. We just want him to play, right? It's you don't need him to do anything but be the guy he's been, and you get fantastic value even at the end of the first, right? Because if you take a first round player and they finish as a top 15 player, that's great value, right? And that's what you can get here. Just over his last 50 NFBC drafts, his min pick's 11, and his max pick is 20. So yeah, I'm there all prices, right? I'm absolutely in. So that's it on Yordan Alvarez. The next guy I'm going to talk about is a guy I feel like I talk about every year. It's Freddie Freeman. So with Freddie Freeman, I wanted to show, this is less about, growth. What I wanted to show was 2023, where we couldn't get enough Freddie Freeman. He had one of the best seasons of his career. In 2024, where he really disappointed us all, I think a little bit in terms of he had the lowest home run total of his career. And the final numbers just weren't great. I do want to point out that for the first 100 games of 2024, Freeman was on pace for 26 home runs and over 200 combined runs and RBI. But, he had some injuries towards the second half. But what's key here, what this process plus chart is showing us on the right compared to the left, is the skills didn't go away, right? It's not like we saw this big dip in some stat that's all of a sudden a big red flag. He performed, maybe a little less well than he did in 2023 skills wise, but they're all still there. There's nothing to worry about. He continues to fall. He's down around pick 25 on average, which I'll show us in the next pick here. So his average around 20. You never have to take him in the first round of a 12-team draft. Let's be very clear here, though, about Freddie Freeman. Over the last 7 seasons, Freddie Freeman has finished in this rank among first basemen: first, second, 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 fifth. Yeah, last year he was still a top 5 first baseman. And over the first half, he was still a top 25 overall hitter. The other players with multiple top 4 finishes at first base in that span is 0. Freddie Freeman is the only player who has been this consistent at first base. It's also 2024 was the first time Freddie Freeman missed more than 4 games in a season since 2017. He's only missed more than 15 games in a season twice since his first full year in the majors back in 2011. This dude's been around forever, of course. Freddie Freeman is still a stud, folks. He's still every bit the hitter we want him to be. Yes, he had some injuries. Yes, he had a disappointing half. But if a disappointing half is all it takes for us to think that this guy who's been such a stud for, over 7 years is all of a sudden someone that we don't have to pay a premium for, I love it, right? I still would pay a slight premium on Freddie Freeman. I'm happy with Freeman. The fact, with ADP, the fact that you can get him that late is just, excellent. If you're picking first in a 12-team league, this guy might come back to you, right? So just knowing that is very comforting to me. I sometimes am afraid to pick first because I hate waiting that long and see all that elite talent fly off the board. The fact that Freddie Freeman will still be there, and the fact that over the last 7 years, he's never finished worse than 5th. And actually, until last year, he had 6 straight seasons finishing as a top 2 first baseman. Stability and floor is what it's all about early in the draft. And you can't get much better than Freddie Freeman, other than maybe Yordan Alvarez. There's just I love everything about it. So now I'm going to talk about someone who's maybe a little less of just like a classic blue chip. I'm going to talk about Brent Rooker, which Brent Rooker's been really interesting to me because I was not in 2023. As you can see, these are actually 2023 charts. These are the charts that scare the crap out of me. This is why I was not in 2023, even though the results on the field sort of look the same. Like we knew he was a power hitter back in 2023. We knew that he had this potential to hit 30, 40 home runs. The problem was this decision value, right? He just made worse and worse decisions as the season went on. He showed no real ability to adjust. Hitter performance is one of the few stats that we have in Kyle Bland's suite of stats that actually looks at like performance on field. Like where did the ball actually go? Was it a single? Was it a double? Whatever. Seeing hitter performance go up like this, despite no change in decision value, is terrifying for a player who also struggles a bit to make contact. So this is why we were so out in 2023 and not really seeing him as a potential star in the future. We get to 2024, it's a very different ball game, right? Like, sure, he's still not a great decision maker, but as long as Brent Rooker is an average decision maker and that his contact is average most of the time, right? We are looking at a player who we can say has taken a huge step forward and is one of the premier power hitters in the league. So what you see obviously is his profile is driven by power. But what I love, again, is that the decision value and contact, they're not killing him, right? Yes, there are times where it really dips down, but that's actually why I wanted to put this rolling strikeout chart here. We do see one spike in strikeouts in 2024. It's right around that time on the chart on the left where you see all those numbers go down below the median line. But what we really see is this change in his strikeout rate, and he gets a new floor of it, right? Like he shows us times where he can sustain these strikeout rates better than 30%. That's a huge deal for Brent Rooker. It's something, again, that was like the biggest knock we had on him, is that he struck out too much. But Brent Rooker showed a real ability to make a change, right? When we talk about skill growth, like that is the skill growth we are talking about. I think Brent Rooker is still, I think a lot of people are a little concerned because they see strikeout rates around 30%, and that's scary, which again, I get it. But from July 1st to the end of the season, Brent Rooker only struck out 23.6% of the time, and he never had a 20-game rolling strikeout rate above 30%. You see right at the end of the season, it spikes up a little. And, again, he may have gotten over there if he played a couple more games. But the big difference there is just what we saw in 2023. This dude almost never had a rolling strikeout rate below 30% after he played about 25 games. And in 2024, he showed us extended periods. He actually spent most of the season with a rolling strikeout rate under 30%. That's the growth we want from a power hitter like Rooker. That's the blend of skills we need. Again, we don't need him to be a plus-plus decision maker. We don't need Brent Rooker to be a plus-plus contact guy. We need him to do enough that his power plays. And that's what he gave us last year. I think he's going to do that again. So I'm very excited about what Brent Rooker can do in 2025. His ADP, again, he finished much, much better than his ADP, right? So his min pick is 50. Brent Rooker he's getting underrated, I think, because there's risk. And again, no player is free from risk, but I think that risk is being overstated because of what we saw in 2023. And we know kind of what that floor looks like, but let's not forget that this player finished as a top 15 player and he got better in the second half, right? This was a top 15 overall player who got better in the second half, who was very good in the first half. And you get to take him, hit a min pick of 50, right? I'll take him at 50 all day long, right? I will take, especially in leagues where I've got 5 outfielders, I got a lot of spots to fill. Brent Rooker's where it's at. He also, I mean, he's not a prodigious walker, but he walks enough that there's a slight bump here in OBP leagues. And sure, right? Will he hit 293 again? Maybe not, right? But it's not as though he's going to hit 100 or 200. Even in that season where everything sort of collapsed on the decision making and all that, he still hit 246. That's not a basement batting average, right? That's a workable batting average. I think because of that strikeout rate in the past being way up above 30%, 32.7% in 2023, it's being overstated. Strikeout rate scares people, right? But Rooker's made that adjustment. He's shown us he can sustain it. And we know he can hit a ton of home runs. This dude drove in 112 Oakland A's, right? Like that's not easy to do all the time. Yes, they had some spikes in their offense, but generally speaking, that's not easy to do. And he did it, right? 39 home runs, 112 RBI. Big Brent Rooker fan, even though I wasn't before, right? Someone shows me a new skill, I'm willing to change my mind. That's what Brent Rooker did. And that's something I think you should be excited about coming into 2025. The next player I want to talk about, obviously everyone's excited about, Jackson Chourio. And the reason I want to talk about Jackson Chourio is because this is a classic case of letting us see a player grow in basically real time, right? So Jackson Chourio started the season rough. There were sort of some Anthony Volpe comps, right? Because he was hitting some home runs. He was stealing some bases. But Volpe was really struggling to put the ball in play as much as he needed to. And when he did, it was often low quality contact. So it didn't look great. But a huge adjustment. Over its final 78 games, Jackson Chourio hit 306, 362, 541, 14 home runs, 14 steals. In other words, over the second half of the season, he was a 30-30 player who hit 300, right? Again, extrapolation is not projection, right? But it's worth, I like to put it in that context so you can, so it's easier to understand just how good a player was during that stretch, right? I'm not saying he can do it over a full season, but during that stretch, he performed as a 30-30 player who can hit 300 with a 362 OBP. And what I love about these charts is not just that they go in the right direction, but that they show these continued improvements, these continued spots where, hey, look, not only can he do better, it's not a spike, it's sustained. Those are the types of adjustments you want to see, right? To see a rolling strikeout rate under 20% for, 70 something games and under 25% for darn near 100 games for a rookie, like get out of here. I am absolutely down for that. Jackson Chourio, he's still obviously an extremely young player. He's someone who, as we'll see in the next chart, his ADP is high, right? You got to take him early. And I don't know if I'm all the way in on the min pick, but man, anywhere near it. Right. I'm at least thinking about it, especially in these 12-team leagues where you only have 3 outfields, which makes the replacement level in the outfield very, very high. Even if we see a sophomore slump, which isn't going to look like a bunch of strikeouts or anything, Jackson Chourio is going to put the ball in play. The batting average might come down, but he's shown us he's always going to steal bases. He's always going to hit home runs, right? It's just the batting average might drop if he makes poor quality contact, a lot of ground balls, things like that, because this dude's not going to strike out a lot, even when he's slumping. Jackson Chourio, if you want to get excited about a rookie, this is one of my favorites. He can be a true 5 category contributor. And even when he's slumping, you're really only going to lose out in the 1 category. The batting average will dip, but he'll still steal. He'll still hit home runs. He's still going to be a key part of this Brewers offense. I'm a big fan of Jackson Chourio. And again, I understand the ADP is very high. You may not want to pay it, but in a shallower league, especially, I am all over it because I know the replacement level is so high that even if he only turns into a 2020 player, I can make up that value. And I've got plenty. I don't need to necessarily replace him, but 2, there's going to be plenty of chances where I can make that up knowing that floor is still so high. So yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree in the chat. This floor is extremely high. Again, the ceiling if we want to call limited ceiling 30-30, right? Like that's the plausible season. We know that because we've seen him do it. We've seen him do it for half a season. I'm willing to say that is what a ceiling looks like. So yeah, it's not like 40 home runs or anything like that, but this is still an elite. I mean, the ceiling here is an elite player. And yeah, you have to pay a premium for it, but man, this could be a really, really exciting player for us as soon as this coming season. About halfway through the list here, now let's talk about an old boring guy. All right, let's talk about Kyle Schwarber. Kyle Schwarber is routinely, I want to say, disrespected because of the type of guy that he is, right? But again, old dogs can learn sort of new tricks, right? So Kyle Schwarber, you know about his strikeout rates, and he's an extremely passive hitter. So with Kyle Schwarber, what we saw in 2023, is a not that special, right? In terms of what he's shown us in the past, mostly a bad decision maker in the zone. And again, you guys know who Kyle Schwarber is. Dude hits dingers. We want him swinging in the zone, right? We want him putting his barrel on the bat on anything in the zone because he can hit it out, right? So these really low decision values in the zone is sort of what can make him extremely inconsistent, because that's what he's really doing. When you see a low in zone decision value, what you're really seeing is a player who's very passive in the zone. And that means he's only attacking a very low number of pitches, and he has to absolutely crush every single one of them, which of course he can do, right? However, with Kyle Schwarber, the more hacks he takes in the zone, the better chance he has of hitting you a home run that day, right? So what we saw in 2024 is, yes, there are times when he really dips down. He becomes very passive in the zone. But what we saw was new aggression in the zone that I'm very, very excited about. If he can, again, if Kyle Schwarber is an average in zone decision maker, that batting average we saw that spiked up this year is absolutely something that he can repeat. Kyle Schwarber, he's, again, we think of him as like this in our mind, he's like 200 hitter, but he hits a bunch of home runs, these kinds of things. Kyle Schwarber finished as the 21st best player in 2025. A lot of that is because of the improved batting average, and a lot of that batting average comes from swinging in the zone, right? You cannot get a hit when you don't swing. When you get a pitch in the zone, it's not a bad idea to swing at it. Seeing Kyle Schwarber make that kind of change, even if he still had times where he fell all the way back down and became very passive, just knowing that he'll go back, that he can go back to it, that he started coming back up towards the end of the season. That's something to me that thinks, maybe he has made an adjustment on what he's willing to do in the zone. And again, this is a player coming off, he's consistently he's a well-established power hitter with a very high floor, and you can pick him late, guys. Like, this dude was, again, he was player 21. A lot of that is because he had the improved batting average, but there's a path back to that, right? And you get a massive discount on Kyle Schwarber. That's what made me fall in love here. Whoever got him at max pick 93, like, my God, like what a value. Again, especially in these head-to-head category leagues, batting average is fluky anyway, right? Batting average comes up and down every week. Yeah, you might have the best overall team batting average, but you still might lose a couple weeks because you had a buzzsaw or your own team struggled for that particular week. It is absolutely worth the risk. Obviously a big bump in OBP, but even in batting average, this is an investment well worth making, especially at what is a discounted rate for absolutely no particular reason that I can discern based on the stats that I've seen. So now we've got Oneil Cruz still. I am still excited about Oneil Cruz. I'm a big fan of Oneil Cruz, and it's all skills based right now, right? So usually when I put these charts on here, I'm showing a guy that's like, oh, look at, he's way over 90th percentile. With Oneil Cruz, I just need this dude to be average because the power is unreal, right? This is Giancarlo Stanton level bat speed and power, right? This dude has the pop all day long. He just needs to, he needs to hit the ball more, right? He needs to swing and miss less, which is what we see in the contact ability. Seeing that steadily move up throughout the season, that shows me he's getting chances to adjust. This dude had a really up and down start to his career between injuries and the Pirates being the Pirates, keeping him down for absolutely no reason. It feels like Oneil Cruz has been around for a long time, but let's be clear, this is the first time he played more than 87 games, right? That's all he got in 2022 when we saw him. He missed, he missed all of 2023, basically. This Oneil Cruz is one of the best overall athletes in terms of like being a physical specimen, right? This dude, he's that guy, when you played Little League or whatever, you probably had a kid who threw the hardest, ran the fastest, and hit the furthest, right? That's Oneil Cruz, but he does that in the major leagues. That's the type of player he is. So just letting him get a little bit more comfortable in that box. We really have only seen him for about a season and a half. Letting him just get a little bit more mature. And again, I get it. The strikeout rate is scary, right? It's not, he did make improvements though as the year went on last year, especially in August and September. We saw that strikeout rate come down under 30%. Man, if this guy has a strikeout rate anywhere near 25% with his skills, we're going to see that batting average jump. It's already 259, right? Like, let's be clear. He hits the ball so darn hard that he can hit ground balls and get singles because one, he's fast, and two, a ground ball at 100, 115 miles an hour is still scary, right? We already saw a 2020 season out of him. We already saw him hit close to 260. There's another level here though, especially if this contact ability can just stay up around average with spikes that are better. Anything he can do to unlock the power he has in that bat is going to make, there's a 30-20 guy here for sure. And I think there's almost some fatigue there because of how long he's been around and how long we've been waiting for him to break out. But again, it's still really just one full season in the majors. I think there's a big step coming. You're allowed to be back in. I know this is, mostly for John, but you're allowed to be back in on Oneil Cruz, right? Like there's just not many people that come around ever with this kind of speed and power. He's a 6'7" powerhouse. He can do it all. It's just going to be a matter of, getting rid of the ground balls, which again, that ground ball problem is just swinging at the wrong pitches. I think there's some decision value gains that can be made. Big step forward, a little bit of decision value, keeping up what he already has. There's a breakout coming in 2025 if we can get even partial results on those kinds of things. So still very excited about Oneil Cruz. His ADP, really not that bad. It's around 40, a min pick of 25. That might be a little rich, but only because in the leagues I play in, I know that they're very sensitive to strikeout rate. So generally speaking, I don't have to pay that price. I can probably pay closer to ADP. I think Oneil Cruz can be a little bit of a polarizing player because again, guys with high strikeout rates, they tend to just be very polarizing. You can probably get him a little closer at ADP, but really once pick 30 comes around, I'm interested, especially in the shallower leagues. It was great to see him stay mostly healthy for a full season. And again, even though, he didn't quite perform to where we drafted him, he was still very good, right? He was a top 20 outfielder, a top 10 shortstop. He finished the season as batter number 50. You're not paying much more of a you're not paying a huge premium for the type of player who showed us who can absolutely, to me, a worst case scenario is repeating batter number 50, right? I think the ceiling is much higher. I think this is a great value for a player who really shouldn't be allowed to have a good value because of the skill set. What I want to move on to now is another young player. I talked about some boring guys earlier. I really wanted to harp on some young players who I find very exciting. And this one's James Wood. This is also a guy who can hit a ton of home runs. He's not the 100 million mile an hour Statcast guy like Oneil Cruz, but James Wood did all the things we want to see from a young player, right? You can't ask a rookie player to come in, especially a player like James Wood, who we did worry about the strikeout rates just a little bit as he was coming up. We knew he'd walk. We wondered how much he'd strike out, especially after in 2023, he struck out a ton. He showed major improvements in 2024 in the minor leagues, comes over to the majors. The final strikeout rate was 28.6 again. But again, that's a little misleading just because of the gains we saw him make, especially in contact ability. We already knew James Wood is going to make good decisions. What we need to know is that he can actually hit the stuff he swings at. The two things I really like to look at, contact ability just in general. And what's that do? It just goes up as he sees more pitches. It goes up as he gets more time in the majors. But the huge change comes against breaking balls. The level of breaking ball you see in the major leagues is so different than the minors. In the minors, usually a guy might have one breaking ball he throws for a strike or 1+ breaking ball and everything else is a work in progress. You get to the majors, these guys, either they throw an elite breaker and play out of the pen, or they are, they've got multiple plus breakers to attack you with. You can't just sit on fastballs. It's sort of the Edouard Julien problem. He just really struggles because guys can attack him more ways than he was sort of prepared for coming out of the minors, at least from what I saw. James Wood made that adjustment and he sustained it, right? It's not like just a spike and then back down showing us, oh, I can do this for a little bit. He kept it up. He figured out at least how to make contact with the breaking balls he did swing at. He may not stay as a 75th percentile contact ability guy, but the fact is he just needs to stay out of the basement. Very excited about that for James Wood. And the power was there. The power was always there, right? You love to see the power start showing up immediately. That mostly comes from selecting the right pitches, and he was a slightly better than average decision maker. And also, he got the ball in the air, exactly what he needs to do. I'm a big fan of James Wood. Obviously, James Wood isn't free, but for the types of skills he shows and the fact that this was a top 5 fantasy prospect, a guy who really consistently stayed as a plus player for pretty much starting in August all the way through. He stayed a plus player. He was a lot more consistent, and you can get him around pick 50 or as low as 35. And again, I'm in for that. I'm absolutely in. It's, again, no players without risk. The strikeout risk is a little bit there. He could sort of run into some ground balls. That's probably the main issue he did have when he was in the major leagues. He did get the ball in the air some. He could stand to do it more. I think that can come with time, right? Most ground ball problems for some of these young players who didn't have ground ball problems in the minors, it's just decision value. Swinging at stuff you can't hit will generally lead to a ball that you roll to the shortstop or the second baseman or someone in the infield. James Wood, I think, can make that adjustment. He already understands the strike zone extremely well. He just needs to refine that a little bit, and he can start being a 30 home run hitter as soon really as this coming season. Projections have him down at 20, and I think that's not enough considering the type of power we know this guy has, that we can see, just in the Statcast data and his minor league track record. There's a lot of ceiling here. Love James Wood, and you should too. Number 8. We've got Junior Caminero, who is not a player I thought would make this list. When I originally started drafting up names, he was nowhere close to the guys I wanted to start looking into, but he made me look. So with Junior Caminero, he did something very, very interesting. And, he was never going to be a high strikeout guy. Obviously, massive potential. The Rays kept him around we kept waiting for the Rays to bring him up, but it's a weird roster. The results weren't necessarily there last season, which is really why I wasn't thinking about him maybe as much as I should have. But we only saw him for 43 games. He didn't hit terribly well. His WRC plus was pretty good, but we saw 6 home runs in 43 games, hit 248 with a sub 300 OBP. Not great, but the growth was there. And the growth can be there before the stats show up, right? We'll often see the skills improve before we really see the stats start following them. Because, players are working through things. What we saw, we'll look at the 2 that are sort of up higher first than the one on the bottom. We saw the contact ability take a big jump, right? Again, it seems like every young player has this happen, but the reason I'm highlighting the players that have this happen is because this does not happen for most young players, right? It is very hard to show this kind of growth so quickly, but elite players can do that. Junior Caminero showing he may be one of those players, makes a big step forward in his contact ability. You might have kind of guessed that from the low strikeout rates all through the minors and in the majors. But what was really interesting is that the strikeout rate doesn't spike at all, right? It just kind of keeps hovering in the low 20s. What we saw was he became much more aggressive, right? And for the most part, people think aggressive is bad, right? And generally speaking, it does have some negative impacts. Like Junior Caminero basically towards the second half of September just stopped walking, right? And you didn't necessarily see this big spike in, say, his WRC plus, right? It sort of stays average. But you do see a spike in his fantasy value, and that's because he starts hitting more home runs, right? He hits 3 of those 6 home runs just in his last, I think it's 12 games, something like that. He doesn't strike out a whole lot more. He also doesn't walk, but he doesn't strike out a lot more. He hits 3 doubles and 3 home runs in these last 12 games. And it comes from being aggressive, right? When pitchers give Junior Caminero something in the zone, he can punish it. And I think he may have been a little apprehensive to do that early on. You want to avoid the strikeout, especially because you're getting your first taste of the major leagues. He becomes much, much more passive than an average player. But something clicks and he decides, you know what? I can swing more. And in both of these charts, what you see is you don't see a negative impact to his contact ability, right? He's swinging more and he's still making plus contact. And he's swinging more and he's not striking out. Sure, the walks went down, but if the guy was seeing more pitches in the zone, he was attacking them more, and we started seeing results. It was just at the end, but we started seeing them, something I'm very excited about with Junior Caminero. The overall season line is going to turn some people off, but skills were there, changes were happening. And again, this is not a player who like his ADP is getting lower and lower, but this is not a player you have to pay a huge premium for, right? Especially for someone with such a prospect pedigree like Caminero. He was the top overall prospect for many folks last season because of his plus plus power. He has a solid hit tool. He's making adjustments. He can do it all. So excited about Junior Caminero. Happy to pay those. Accidentally clicked, but that's okay because I'm also excited about Parker Meadows. Usually I'd say fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. But I'm ready to be fooled a second time if that's in fact what happens. Parker Meadows really started last season very slow, but made one very significant change when he comes back towards the end of the season. And what we really see, similar to Caminero, is just an improvement on pitches in the zone, right? We love, again, there's such a bias that I see towards high walk rates, right? And we equate walk rate with pure decision value. But as Kyle and our other writers have sort of called out, there's two types of decision value. And it's great if you're good at not swinging at pitches that are outside of the zone, right? Those are just pitches that very few players can do anything with. But it's also important that you swing in the zone, right? You've got to be able to attack the pitches in the zone when you get them, and you've got to be able to do damage with them. That is something Parker Meadows does towards the end of last season. We've seen Parker Meadows for about 120 games so far, a lot of very up and down performance, but still we've seen 12 home runs, 17 stolen bases. I'm very excited about what he can do. Really, when he came back, he kept that, that rolling WRC plus for really since the start of August on. He kept that above 100. He was a big part of that Tigers run because of the hot bat he was swinging and the big improvements that he made to his decision value, especially on stuff in the zone. With Parker Meadows, yes, I think one of the biggest things is, earlier in the season or earlier in the offseason, we thought this is the locked in leadoff guy every single day. He may have some competition against left-handed pitching when due to the addition of Gleyber Torres, who can be a leadoff hitter, though I still think Parker Meadows is going to get a shot to play every day right at the top of the lineup. Parker Meadows, somebody who, again, he's got power, he's got speed, and very importantly, an opportunity and a job that can be won, which is the job at the top of this lineup. So he's someone who I actually rank much higher than his ADP would maybe suggest. I've got him just outside my top 100 right now, and I'm probably going to start moving him in because every time I look at stuff for Parker Meadows, I get excited. This is a guy who can definitely hit 15 home runs. I think he can steal 25 bases or more. He gave us 6 home runs and 5 steals in 50 games after his call up. And that all improved after he got to the leadoff role, hit 296. It's all there, right? Parker Meadows has the skills and he's actually slipping in ADP, likely because of that addition for Gleyber Torres. And I did mention that it's a potential risk, but I think it's being overstated. It shouldn't have moved his ADP by almost 20 spots, right? Over around. No, that's too far. Very excited about Parker Meadows. And I think these are great prices to pay. Especially in a 5 outfield league, to have someone who can come in and potentially be a 4 category contributor is someone who, he's not going to give you a ton of RBIs and leadoff role, but he can do the rest. Someone that, again, he's shown us skill improvements as long as he can even maintain some of it. I don't need him to go back to being a 75th percentile decision maker in the zone. I just need him to be better than average. I need him not to be in the basement because that's what we saw at the start of the season. That's where the risk was. They let too many pitches in the zone go. He makes that adjustment, and that's all a mental thing. I'm not asking him to be bigger, stronger, faster. I just need him to swing a little more at the stuff his brain wants him to swing at anyway. So I'm really looking forward to that. Finally, Jackson Holliday, another player who I didn't think would make this list, but young players having growth, that gets me excited every single time. Another player who was one of, if not the top prospects coming into 2024. And I don't need to tell you that it was mostly down for him last season. Did not go well. The stats never really improved, but gosh darn it, the decision value did. Not just in general, but also against breaking balls. And I mentioned earlier, breaking balls are one of the toughest things for these young players to adjust to. They see a lot more of them. They see a much higher quality. They see a lot more of them for strikes. So it becomes hard for them to, sort of hit it first. Very few players come out of the gate just wrecking breaking balls. Jackson Holliday obviously was not one of those players. He struggled with them, but we saw the jumps happening. And again, this guy wasn't the top prospect in baseball because people thought he was handsome, right? Like he was that because he has a huge skill set. There's a lot of talent here. And all of a sudden, despite the fact that he shows this growth, he makes these improvements to his decision value. He makes these improvements against breaking balls. He's going after pick 200, right? The min pick of, there's some min picks that are very, very low, but the average min pick's around 150, 120. You shouldn't need to take him quite that high. He's going to be there for you. Probably, even around, pick 200. He's actually falling further and further in drafts, likely because he's going to hit towards the bottom of that lineup. But you know what? You're not going to get a lot of bites at the top overall prospect Apple, especially after pick 200 when they have a secure job at the start of the season. And so that's something. It's not an opportunity I want to pass up. I thought I was out. I saw those changes. I'm willing to, because this isn't a gamble anymore, right? This is a flyer at pick 233, especially in shallower leagues with a player who could absolutely be incredibly relevant at a position, where there's plenty. There's not a ton of guys dominating the position. So happy to take Jackson Holiday. Really anytime after pick 150, why not? Right? What have you got to lose? This could be a huge breakout star in the making. And not just because of the prospect pedigree, but because of the real things he showed in the batter's box towards the end of last season. So while I have just a couple minutes, I wanted to go through some more rolling charts that I found that are very exciting. Riley Green. I'm a huge fan of Riley Green. I think projections have always been too low on his power. This dude hits the ball very hard, and now he's getting it in the air over 30% of the time consistently. This shows us not just a new ceiling, but a much higher floor in 2024. We saw him make these adjustments. These adjustment points tend to happen after a guy bottoms out. The adjustment point is, when does he stop the fall? When does it start coming back up? That starts happening much, much higher in terms of overall fly ball rate. Really excited about Riley Green. He can hit home runs even in big old Comerica Park because he's got that kind of pop. Listen to the ball off his bat. It's loud, baby. I love it. Wyatt Langford, another player, started out really, really slow, but he really got to unlock the power the more he played, getting the ball up in the air more. I think attacking pitches. A lot of times power is a matter of fractions of an inch, round bat on a round ball. That gets refined over time. And just the way he climbed towards the end of the last season, we saw the stats too, right? But the stats weren't empty. They weren't hollow. They were backed by actual skill changes. Very excited about Wyatt Langford. Thrilled. I almost wish that the season was stopped a little earlier so you have a better chance to grab him. The price is pretty high now, but it's not a bad one to pay. Jonathan India, a guy who's kind of boring, but hey, he showed plus power towards the whole second half of last season. And this is park agnostic. This isn't just playing in Great American Small Park, right? This is actual improvements to his power. He's always a plus decision value guy. That's where most of his value really comes from. He brings any of this power to Kansas City. He's going to have a great season leading off for them and hitting in front of some guys who I think, that lineup is better than it feels like sometimes. So I'm really looking forward to Jonathan India's season as someone you can get very, very late as a really high floor player with a little bit of upside. Even if the contact ability is average, he only swings at stuff he can hit. So he doesn't need a plus contact ability because he's only going to swing at the premium pitches to attack. And he showed that sustained growth. Looking forward to Jonathan India next season. But my time is about up. That is about all I've got. I've got my contact info there if you want to catch me on Blue Sky or on Twitter, scottchew.pitcherlist.com or at if the chew fits. Thanks for kind of sitting through here, listening to me just ramble on and on about all these guys that I really am excited to see in 2025. Players who showed real skill changes or who are being undervalued for, frankly, no reason, namely Kyle Schwarber. If nothing else, I hope you at least take this time to just throw a little search on one of these guys. And again, thank you to Kyle for those awesome ADP charts, being able to see how ADP moves. If you're one of our PL Pro members, you get access to these charts. They're just amazing, especially this time in the season when things are changing so much. It's a lot of fun to just watch these players move around. But, so thank you, Kyle, for that. And thank you all for sitting through, and I hope you at least research one of these guys or find someone to get excited about. I hope you fall in love one more time this offseason before your draft.